keep on rolling, baby. You know what time it is. In this video, we're going to take a look at Chosen Yasuo Duelist reroll. If you notice in the background, it's actually a game that I played where I got first playing the same composition. So the pictures and such that I'm going to take a look at are things that are generally optimal, but you can't have the same thing every single game. So for instance, if you look at this game, I'll have Yasuo in the front row because I have a Fiora 3 with 2 lockets on him. Well, the general idea is to have Yasuo in the second row so he doesn't get blown up right away. And if you want to do me a huge favor and blow up the likes and subscriptions on my channel, I would really appreciate it. Let's jump right into it with looking at items for Yasuo. The first item you're going to want to make sure to get is the QSS. This is because you don't want Yasuo sitting in a tornado with a Zephyr or being stunned in some way at the beginning of the round. He's going to be your main damage source for the whole game until you find Yone. And speaking of damage, feel free to put an IE or Hodge on him. The IE will give a 20% crit chance, which is really good to combine with the duelist rate, and Hodge can act as damage or healing depending on how it rolls for each round. If you have a lot of defensive items, it doesn't hurt to add a GA or Titans on him as well. Since he's going to be carrying you through your rounds, you want to make sure that he doesn't die right away. The next unit you're probably going to get early on is Fiora. Fiora is actually pretty good at survivability because of her ultimate. Not only does it make her invulnerable for a few seconds from any damage or spell, but when she's done with it, she'll go ahead and stun whoever's right next to her. So the longer that we can keep her alive, we can just use her as a stun bot, so we put tank items on her. The Sunfire just kind of helps do some extra DPS to anyone that she's around or stuns, and since we can potentially get 3-star Fiora really easily in the early game, we're going to want to try to put a locket on her because lockets scale with unit level. So if you take a look at the locket description, the shield levels are 300, 375, and 500. So for example, in this game I had 2 lockets on a 3-star Fiora, so the 4 units next to Fiora would be getting a 1000 hit point shield. Getting us to 4 duelists will be Jax. You don't really want to prioritize these defensive items on Fiora or Jax, but it is nice to help beef up your front line so you can have some extra damage from Kalista potentially. Jax is kind of also used like a stun bot with his AoE stun, and he is another unit you could potentially 3-star, but you shouldn't really sit there and reroll for it. So Sunfire, Dragonclaw, and Bramblevest should do the trick. Early on you can also pair Janna with Fiora. This will give them both Enlighten so they'll actually cast a little quicker. Just having 2 Enlighten gives a 50% mana increase. Janna's also good early on because when units don't do a lot of damage, her shields have a lot of value. Since she's already a core part of the early duelist comp, you can make her a divine spat holder. It can really help you if you can't find that 6th duelist early on. Plus she'll spam shields a lot faster. And then later on you can throw that duelist spat onto Yone. If you find a Kayle along the way, you can also throw it on him because Kayle is an awesome duelist. Your other main source of damage throughout the game is going to be Kalista. She's basically your backline threat, and the best thing you can do for Kalista is throw an RFC on her so she doesn't have to move at all. The less time she spends walking around the map to try to track down who she's attacking, the more time she can just spend throwing spears in their face. And speaking of throwing spears in their face, you want to match that with a hurricane as well, and follow it up with a rage blade or a death cap. The reasoning behind the rage blade is so she attacks faster, but the reasoning behind the death cap is that when she pulls the spears out, they actually do AP damage. So this can actually make her a dual threat, being AD and AP. And that tier can hopefully eventually turn into a blue buff for Lee Sin. One of the advantages of a blue buff on Lee will be that he can kick very early on into the match. And then once he starts kicking, he gets more mana every time as well, so he keeps on kicking. Now that we've covered the items for the main units of the composition, we should take a look at where you should place each unit, and we'll start with the early game. You want to be able to put in 4 duelists as early as possible because this will give you the most damage potential. And don't forget, Janna also gives 2 Enlighten, so you can get more stuns from Fiora and more shields from Janna. This is the typical board where you find Jax, Fiora, and Janna because they're all 2 stars or less. Yasuo is your strongest unit at this point, so you want to put him in the middle in the front line, and then basically have 2 stun units on the end. You can scout around and see where assassins are jumping and put Janna in the opposite corner. The mid game should look something more like this, where you finally fit your 6 duelists in, and you also have extra units on the side. At this point you can actually bench Janna for a little bit so you can throw in both Irelia and Shen to get Adept. Since Irelia has both Divine and Enlighten, she'll help out Jax and Fiora at the same time. This positioning is sort of assuming you have a locket on Fiora. If you're facing something like assassins, you can take Irelia and put him in the backline next to Kalista. She can throw out an AoE stun and then let Kalista do some damage and kill them off. Both Irelia and Tryndamere are kind of stand-in units because we're gonna get rid of them later. They provide great value because Tryndamere completes the 6 duelists and Irelia completes the Divine, Enlightened, and Adept, but once we can find the other units in the late game, we can replace them with Lee, Yone, and put Janna back in. You'll also notice that Yasuo is in the second row because you want to protect him a little bit. This front line is basically taking away all the threat of killing him right up front, and he'll sneak around the side and do his damage. He also can't be next to any other unit or he loses his Exile Shield. Now that we're approaching the late game in this game, it's a good time to go over it on the board. So again, in general, you're going to want to frontline your tanky units and put Yasuo on the side, with Jax on one side to do the stunning and Shen on the other side to do the taunting. You can easily move these units around depending on who you want to target on the enemy team. For instance, if you have a big carry you want to hit on the front line, you put Lee in front of them, and then you can put Shen next to the secondary one. You can also position Jax along the side with the carry so he can hopefully approach them and stun them all. And ideally you want to end the game with a Yone because that will give you the extra lifesteal for Exile too, as well as putting Janna back in for the shields because now you already have Adept with Yone. Now that we've covered both the items you want on your units and where to put them on the board, I just wanted to throw in some tips to help you play the comp in general. One of the first things you want to note is to not start pre-leveling because that will lower your chances of getting Yasuo early on. Every time you buy XP, you're putting in 4 at a time. Naturally, you only get 2 per round, so you're actually leveling 2 rounds worth at once. And every time you reach a higher level, your odds of rolling a level 1 unit get lower. To build upon the pre-leveling thing I mentioned earlier, there's also strategy on when you should roll your gold and how you should spend it. You'll spend the majority of your time in stage 2 at level 4, which has a 55% chance of hitting a level 1 unit. You will automatically be 5 by stage 3-1, however, and this drops your chance down to 45%. And that's not a huge drop, but you might consider spending some of that gold that you have with a better chance. You don't want to spend too much because you want to make sure to build upon your interest again, but if you're just a few units away, it's worth a shot. And you definitely want to make sure that you have Yasuo 3 before you hit level 6 because it drops to 35% then. If you get lucky and you hit an early loaded dice, definitely play that right away. Make sure to play it onto a Yasuo or a Fiora to get your best possible chance. This can be amazing to have a 3-star Yasuo early on in the game. As you can see here, the odds of hitting a 1-star unit go down on every level, so the earlier you can play it, the better. One problem you might run into is just not finding enough Yasuo units early on, and if this is causing you to have a weak board and lose a lot of hit points, you might consider pivoting. This tends to happen when more than one person starts to play the Duelist early on. Even if other people are planning on getting rid of it later, they still lower the pool so you can't find yours. I've seen a game with 3 Duelist Yasuo Chosens at the very beginning. People who find Fiora Duelist do the same thing and they're taking away your units. If you've already made your items such as an IE or GA, you can consider pivoting to something like Talon. On the other hand, if you have a lot of hit points and maybe you found an early Kalista and have an RFC already, you can also just consider going a fast 8 and leveling that way. In this case, you're not going to slow roll for Yasuo, you're going to change your focus to a new carry such as a Kalista or maybe even a Duelist Kayle. By getting to 8 faster, you'll be able to throw in a Lee and a Yone. And since you won't be spending 6 components on Yasuo, you can use them to either beef up your front line or save them for items for Yone. If you are able to find Yasuo 3 though, don't hesitate to go to 6 right away. You don't want to stay at level 5 and roll for Fiora because you'll find more of those along the way anyways. And while it's nice to have a Fiora 3, it's not really necessary. This will also help raise your odds on finding either a Shen or a Tryndamere. This will let you play either Adept with 4 Duelists or even 6 Duelists plus Janna. Irelia is a great plug and play unit because it provides both Divine and Enlighten. It's especially good in the mid game before you find Yone because it lets you also hit Adept with Shen. As I mentioned before, you can also backline it and protect Kalista with the AoE stun she provides, but the only drawback is you have to take out Janna because you don't need 3 Enlightened on the board. It's a good trade-off because you won't hit Divine until you get a Lee Sin, and throwing in Shen without Irelia is kind of pointless. And similar to Janna, Irelia will provide utility for the team. Positioning Janna and Kalista in the backline is something that you'll continually need to scout for. You'll want to have Kalista on the opposite side of their carry because with her RFC she can reach across the whole board. This is similar to Yasuo where you don't want to have him get blown up right away. If you have a lot of assassins jumping on you and you can't control them all, then you can consider moving her up to the second row where Yasuo is. This will have the assassins jump past you and you can put your tankier units in the back. You can place Janna on the hex next to Kalista. This will provide a little bit of decoy for Kalista to do her work while Janna provides shields. Since you're going to have your Kalista in the corner, you can also use Janna as bait for an Aatrox hook. Just be sure to switch them at the last second so Aatrox gets Janna instead of Kalista. Sometimes you'll see some Duelist players sitting at level 7 and trying to reroll for 3-star Jax. I don't think this is a very efficient use of your time or money. This could be useful if you have low hit points and not much gold and you need something to save you, but if you aren't having those problems, you should go straight for 8 and look for Lee and Yone. You can always keep Jax and Kalista on the bench as you pass them, but but sitting at 50 gold and rolling for them doesn't seem to be the right play. Once you find Yone, you'll also have lifesteal for Yasuo. This goes great with all the damage he's already doing, and he can heal himself along the way now. Plus you'll be able to deal with their carry in the front line if you find a Lee, because you can kick him right out of the way. And the last tip I'm going to go over is the positioning of Yasuo and Yone. In general, you're going to want to have Yasuo on the opposite side of the other team's carry. This is just to avoid getting blown up right away and getting a lot more damage done over time. Yone, on the other hand, wants to be right in their face and jump into the carry. So if you put them on opposite sides on the second row, that'll be the perfect positioning for them. This will keep them close enough to the front where they can sneak into the other team, but far away enough that they won't get automatically focused by the enemy front line. And that wraps up my Duelist guide. Thank you for watching, and feel free to sub and like if you enjoyed.